Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for the right time and place to betray Jesus. When it was evening, Jesus sat down at the table with the 12 disciples. While they were eating, he said, "The truth is, one of you will betray me." Greatly distressed, one by one, they began to ask him, "I'm not the one, am I, Lord?" He replied, "One of you who is eating with me now will betray me. For I, the Son of Man, must die, as the scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for my betrayer! Far better for him if he had never been born." Jesus told them, "Tonight all of you will desert me. For the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." Peter declared, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I never will." "Peter," Jesus replied, "the truth is, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. "No," Peter insisted, "not even if I have to die with you. I will never deny you." And all the other disciples vowed the same.
Well, I'm guessing you've been there at some point in life, right? They say they've got your back, and you only discover that all you have in your back is a knife, right? You know, maybe it's a business partner. All was good until it was clearly not good. Or maybe you knew the whole time there was just something going on and something didn't quite make right, even though he kept saying or she kept saying, "Everything's good, it's under control," and then you begin to get the phone calls, or maybe one of those wonderful visits. Maybe you have a 60 minutes moment. Then we have the other moments. The moments where it's not a business relationship, it's a personal relationship. And the one that is promised before your friends, before your family, before God. They would love, that they would honor, that they would cherish. And now it seems like none of those things was real. It seems like that moment was millions of years ago. And what do you do? What do you do when you find yourself betrayed? And the problem with betrayal is, as much as it hurts us, there's another part to this event in Jesus' life that reminds us again about how complicated life is. Because while we have been betrayed, we knew at times that we have been on the other side. And we're the one that has said, "I'm going to be there for you," and then we aren't, and we have our explanations, "Oh, something came up," or "I couldn't," or "If I did it, or I wouldn't," and Maya Angelou has some great wisdom for us in those moments. Because there's something within us that wants to always believe, especially our friends, we want to believe they're telling us the truth. Somebody that we care about is not going to lie to us, and we give them a pass, and we go through it. And at one point, do we believe not their words, but their actions? And you know what the crazy twist of this whole event from Jesus' life is? It's how he treats his betrayers. It's the crazy part. I've read through this story multiple times this week, and I just can't get over how nice Jesus is to Judas, how nice he is to Peter, how nice he is to the other 10 guys, who within a few hours, all of them will betray him in one way or another. He'll remind us that our moral high ground that we claim at moments sometimes is neither moral nor even a ground to stand on. He'll remind us that in the moments when we feel confident, when we stand up and say, yes, Jesus, yes, God, we would never, we won't, he also understands that he knows much more about us and about life than we do. That sometimes the hardest thing for you and the hardest thing for me is to believe what he says about us. Especially when we have a hard time believing that's true about us, because we don't think that's true. So before we jump into the story today, and if you're with us first time, welcome. I'm glad you joined us. We are winding a whole series down, a whole message series on the 7 days, the 7 last days of Jesus' life. And we're winding up to, obviously, next week, Easter and the resurrection, the hopeful part of this whole story. But to get to the hopeful part, you got to sometimes go through all the yucky parts. And that's where we're at today. So I invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Father, every one of us has been touched by betrayal. For some of us, it's fresh. For some of us, just thinking about it makes it fresh again. There are the people who have worked behind the scenes, who've said they're our buddies and they've got our back, only to find out they really wanted the job. And they were just stringing us along to get the inside information. For some of us, we were promised things, we were assured things, and then none of them came true. But Father, if I'm honest this morning, I also recognize that there are way too many times that I have betrayed you. That I haven't been bold, as Debbie prayed to you earlier about. That I haven't stepped up. That I have avoided hard things. That there are even times when I have done stuff intentionally to make a win for me and a loss for someone else. And I just pray today, Lord, as again, I look at this story and I think about this story, that again, you would remind me that while this is not a story about me or any of us in this room, it is a story about us. And hearing your voice and hearing your description of who we are, and more importantly, whose we are, even in those moments. So I just ask you to use this space this morning for your glory, for your sake, and for your will and your work today in your name. Amen. If you were here last week, you remember we had this story about this woman who brings in this expensive bottle of perfume and breaks it, and how the guys respond and how they take off, and then they go off to Passover later, either that day or the next day. And there's this thing, and in fact, picking up in John chapter 13, John picks the story up just after this woman has broken this expensive jar, this perfume that cost a year's salary. And he says immediately after that, Judas goes out and begins this process. And then later he's with them in the upper room, and Jesus has just finished washing everyone's feet. He's washed John's feet and James' feet and Philip's feet and Andrew's feet. He's washed Peter's feet after a little convincing. And he has even washed Judas's feet. And as he finishes that, and he sits down at the table again, and he says, guys, let me be clear about this. This is something you ought to do. Every time you begin to think you're something special, get down and wash some feet, because you need to remind yourself that who I am, I came to serve, not to be served. And this whole following me is not getting attention, not getting the power, not getting the prestige. This is about serving others. And he says you need to do that. And then John picks up the story and says that he, talking about Jesus, was troubled in spirit. Clearly, John picks up that something's going on with Jesus. Jesus can't control whatever's going on. And he says to them openly, I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth that one of you will turn against, that is, betray me. And we can imagine what that must have felt like, right? As Jesus looks around the room, as they hear those words, they begin to look, and John goes on and says, they do that. They begin to look at each other and begin to wonder, which of us is Jesus talking about? I mean, who could it be? How is that possible? And they begin to have these little side conversations, because who in the world knows what's going on? And John says, as they're there, Simon Peter is over there, and he motions to John, who's sitting next to Jesus, and says, hey, find out, get some information on this. And so John will go on and describe himself as the follower, leans closer to Jesus and asks him, Lord, who is it? Now, we picture this scene as everything's quiet and John's there and everybody's waiting for Jesus to respond. But again, if somebody said something that you're going to do this terrible thing, you begin to kind of wonder, you begin to talk to each other. I think there's at least 13 of them in this room, maybe more, but there's at least 13 of them in this room. And the side conversations, and you know how it is, you get enough people together, there's side conversations, and they're saying, I would never do it. Yeah, I'd never do it. Yeah, who could that be? And what about him? I don't know. And they begin to have all this stuff. And so John asked this question. And Jesus says these words, I will dip this piece of bread into this dish. And the man I give it to is the man who will turn against and betray me. And then he does that. To which we think, if we're sitting at the table, we all go, gotcha, right? Because we've just heard him say that. We've watched the bread because we're watching who he gives it to. He gives it to him. Everybody pounces on him. But that's not what takes place. He gives it there, but when he says these words, when Jesus says these first words, that one of you will betray me, Judas thinks in his mind at that moment, oh, fill in the blank, all right? Whatever word you put in there. Right? I'm an idiot. He knows, of course he knows. He seems to know everything, but it's up. I'm such an idiot. How could I think I could get away doing this? And Judas waits for Jesus to out him. And if you read this as his out it, you missed it, because John will say he remembers after Jesus gets that piece of bread, he says to Judas, what you have to do, go and do it quickly, which simply means do what you got to do. That whatever you have your plan set is not going to thwart God's plans. That whatever you're trying to do is not going to stop you. You've made this decision. Go and take care of it. And John says that no one at the table understood why Jesus said that to Judas. We look back and think in that story, how could they miss the clues? And if you read the other writers that have written about this, they will say that even before all this starts, that Jesus looks at the group that night and says, guys, I'm telling you something, I'm telling you this now so that later you will know that I'm him. You will know that I'm who I said I was, because you're going to remember stuff later as you think back and go, oh, right. That's why that took place. But at the moment, they are all clueless. In fact, John will say, since that is Judas, was the one who kept the money, some of them thought that Jesus had sent him away to buy what was needed for the feast, this big Passover feast. Maybe they're going to run out of food. Maybe they needed some stuff for tomorrow. Or that he was going to give something to the poor. And every time I read this story, I just shake my head at Jesus, because I think, how could you not point at him and say, how dare you? How could you not stop and say, really, Judas? But Jesus doesn't do that. He simply looks at him. And he knows that Judas knows that he knows what Judas is doing. And Judas leaves. And then just a little bit later, Matthew will chime in with this part. And he looks at the 11 remaining disciples and he tells them that tonight you will all stumble in your faith. That is, you will all fall away on account of me. That you are all going to fall away and it's going to be my fault. Because of what's going to happen to me, it's going to cause you to do something. But he says, after I rise from the dead, I will go ahead of you in Galilee. He says, this is going to happen, but guys, just understand, that's not throwing the plan off. That's not going to change anything as much as you're going to be worn down. You're going to feel terrible. That's not going to happen. Of course, we all know what Peter says. Everyone else may stumble in their faith. Everyone else may fall away. Everybody else may desert you, Jesus, but not me. In fact, as the passage that Kofi read earlier, Jesus will come back and say, Peter, I got bad news for you, buddy. You're not just going to deny me once. To which Peter says, you don't know what you're talking about. Because in the moment, he believes that what he believes about himself is truer than what Jesus believes about him. And of course, all the other pipe in because they don't want to miss a chance. We will die for you as well. And then Matthew picks up the story just after this as they go out. That Jesus has now been arrested, and this gives us a little insight into Judas. Because Judas has now witnessed Jesus get arrested, and he understood that was what was going to happen. But all of a sudden, he recognizes they're taking Jesus not to the temple, but they're taking him to Pilate, part of the Roman government, which tells him something important. And as Judas saw that they had decided to kill Jesus, that Jesus had been condemned, and this was apparently not part of his plan. He thought he's going to get arrested, and then some have supposed that what it means is going to get arrested, and he's going to go, ta-da, here I am, I'm the Messiah, I'm going to knock everybody out, I'm going to take over. It's going to sort of force his hand. And when Judas recognizes that this is not forcing his hand, this is leading to his death, Matthew says he was filled with remorse for what he had done. He's at a moment when he recognizes that what seemed like such a good idea just a few hours ago, now it doesn't just seem like not a good idea, it seems like a really bad idea. Matthew says he took the 30 silver coins back to the leading priest and the elders, and he simply said these words to them: I sinned. I messed up, and I messed up in such a huge way that you have no idea how bad it is. Because I've handed over to you that if I've betrayed an innocent man. And these compassionate, caring, religious leaders who understands God's love and God's grace and God's justice and God's law and God's all these kinds of stuff. In their great compassion, they look at Judas and they say these words: what is that to us? Not my problem. That's your problem. That's your responsibility. That's your concern. That's not ours. And in that moment, they claim this high moral ground. It really has no morals to it. Well, no grounds to it. But let's be honest, aren't there times? Haven't you been in one of those conversations when you've decided that the ends do justify the means, even if they're not quite perfect, but at least you're not doing this, at least you're not like that? You ever argue with yourself that way? I know what I did was not right, but you know what? What you did was worse. And because you did something worse, that makes my bad not as bad as yours, which means I'm the better. I'm the holier of the group. And as I told you when we started this series, this whole section of your Bible is not about teaching stories, not some kind of teaching lessons of Jesus. This is simply pictures into his life and the things that happen in his life. But it's crazy that in his life, the things that happen have such such cross paths with where we have our life at times. So here's some observations. Observations for this week are simply this. Number one, people have reasons for their actions. Nobody's writing this down. You ought to write that down. That's important. Because sometimes somebody does something, you say, what were you thinking, right? How could you possibly do that? But we need to remember, people have reasons for their actions. Because that doesn't make those actions right. But it does help us understand why they did what. On that night, Judas has a reason for what he does. Once he discovers what he does is not going to end up in the results that he thought, he goes, oh mama, this is bad. This is worse than bad. This is bad. I mean, this is innocent man's blood, not just any innocent man. This is the guy that I thought, even at this moment, think is the Messiah. And I'm the guy. I'm the guy that no one will ever name their child after from this point forward. I'm him. It is so easy to look at stories and forget there's always some stories behind it. It doesn't mean it makes those stories right. It just makes it mean there's some parts there. It reminds us again of how complicated things are. Because Peter reminds us that on that evening there was not one betrayer. There were 12 betrayers. The difference was one betrayer was intentional about what he was trying to do, is betraying. The other 11, they betrayed because they thought they were going to stand up stronger. And in the moment they discovered, we can't. Second observation. I don't think you can read this story and miss the power of that question. When Jesus looks at 12 men that he has literally poured his life into for the past 3 years, he has lived with them. He has slept with them, not in any kind of bad, creepy way, but they've gone places, they've traveled together. They have eaten together. They have fished together. They have gotten away from the crowds together because crowds drove them crazy at times. They were in the midst of the crowds at times. He has tried to pour everything he could possibly into them in a matter of a little over 3 years. Everything, trying to stuff it in, because he knows he's not going to be there. He just wants to get it in so that later they can pull it all out. And it's in that group that he looks at. And doesn't just say, one of you will betray me. He says that, but also will finish that whole story, that whole event, that whole night by saying, all of you are going to do that. And for me, just personally for me, it's a reminder to ask myself the question, is it me more often? Because I don't know if you're like me. When something goes wrong, it is never my problem. Never my fault. It's always somebody else's. That when I think I'm a certain way and somebody else says, no, you aren't, I tend to believe that I'm a certain way because that's what I believe. And in a greater sense, it is a reminder that our confidence in ourselves and even in our faith is not the thing that we're going to stand on or fall on. See, here's the question that popped in my mind. What if this is about trusting Jesus more and ourselves less? Because it seems like when we trust ourselves more, we tend to trust him less, which puts us on dangerous ground. And so in those moments when you feel God speaking to you, and maybe it's through another person, maybe it's through an impression, maybe you hear voices, I don't know. If you do, go talk to Pastor Jason. But in those moments when you hear something, maybe instead of pushing them away and saying, no, that's not, I can't be, maybe the important thing is to say, maybe this is true. Maybe it isn't them, it isn't her, it isn't him, it isn't this job, it isn't this school. Maybe it really is me. And maybe if it is me, I need to remind myself I need to trust him more and to trust myself less. Because it's a theme. It seems to pick up the people that have all the multiple people that end up writing this thing we call our Bible. There seems to be this consistent theme about when we think we are stronger, when we think we're better, when we think we never would do something, that's a dangerous place to be. Even though we love being in that place, because I would love to think I would never do that. Because if I think I can do that, then, what does that say about me? But there is this thing about trusting him more and trusting myself less. Another observation is this, that it's only too late when it is. Which I thought, by the way, was a highlight of the observation, so I was hoping for some kind of response off that. Think about the wisdom of that statement. It is only too late when it is, right? At what point was it too late for Judas? Was it that when he left that meal that night, when the lady spent all that money and did all that stuff, and Jesus kind of got on him and embarrassed him and said, hey, that was a fine expenditure. And he thought, what a waste. How wasteful can we be? And if somebody thinks that's okay, I got to change something here. It was at the moment that it was too late. Was it too late when he takes the 30 pieces of silver? A huge amount of money back then. Was it too late when he's sitting at the table and Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me, and he goes, oh no, he knows. Was it too late when he said, Judas, what you're going to do, go out and do it quickly? Was it too late just before he sees Jesus in the garden there, and he's there with the Romans, and he kisses Jesus just to show which one of the group is the guy they're after? Or was it too late at the moment after they haul him away? Or is it too late when he notices that they're going to take Jesus to Pilate and not to the temple? Is that when it's too late, when he goes back to the priest and says, I have innocent blood on my hands? It's important for you to answer that question for yourself. Because where you put the too late at tells you a lot about how you see God. See, I believe it was too late for Judas. When the verse I didn't read said that after he gives back this money, that he went out and he hung himself. And at that moment, he had made it too late because he wasn't here anymore. Because this isn't just about Judas, it's about the other 11. Because when was it too late for them? Because for them, they all come back around. Which leads me to something that Paul, the guy who wrote the most of our part of our Bible we call the New Testament, wrote just a very simple one line that captures this when he said, God shows that proves his own great love for us in this way. That Christ died for us while we were still sinners. When were you still a sinner? And Christ died for us. Who's the us? We're us, right? Us is in the house today. Us is watching online today. Us are the people you passed on the way coming here and the people you'll pass on the way going out of here. Us is that woman who cut you off because she was on her phone this morning. Us are those lovely people you work with 5 long days a week. Us are the kids you go to school with, the other students. Us are even those teachers, even that one really old, crotchety English teacher. Us are those people that you talk about. Us are the people that you're biased against. Us are the people that you don't like, and even the ones that don't like you either. Us are the people that have betrayed you. And us are the people that you've betrayed. Because us is we, and we is and while we were we, he died for us. Which tells us one last observation. Well, Jesus didn't die more for some and less for others. That's an important bypoint, but here's the last observation. And to know that for sure, you just have to read this story again. There are so many times when we look back and say he clearly outed Judas, and Judas was clearly not outed because John and Matthew, they'll all tell us that they were clueless to what was going on. That Jesus never wavered in his love for Judas. He never wavered when he first knew that Judas was up to something. He never wavered when he sat down and washed Judas's feet or when he washed Peter's feet. His love for him never wavered when he passed that piece of bread, when he told him to go do what he needed to do. It didn't waver when he saw them in that garden that night and when he comes up to kiss him. It didn't waver as he was led away. I don't even think Jesus' love for Judas wavered when he hung himself. Which is the amazing thing about Jesus. Which is the reminder why Jesus is so different from me, and I'm guessing from you. Because there is a limit to my love. There's a limit to my patience. There's a frustration. What do you do with those that want to betray you? That you know are working at it. And as much as I'd like to say, let me tell you the story, Jesus tells me just to keep loving them. He would tell me to pray for my enemies. Which, by the way, I do. Thankfully, it's a short list. To love them. Not because they deserve it. Not because they're good people. But to do it. because it's what he does for me. See, Jesus never stops treating us better than we deserve. Never. So let me wind up by just asking you a couple of questions. Right? Say that out loud to me. Jesus knows what? Now this time I want you to say I'm, all right? Jesus knows, right? He knows what you're going to do, and he knows what you're going to do even before you do it. Even though you don't know what you're going to do before you do it, at the moment you think, this is what I'm going to do, like Peter or like the rest of the guys. This is what we're going to do. We're going to stand up. We're going to die for you, Jesus. The moment happens. I don't know the guy. Just hanging out over here. I don't know what's going on. But Jesus knows what you're going to do. The question is this. What do you do in that moment? Because in our moment of failure, in our moment of betrayal, we either turn away or we turn toward. And to quote Jesus, I tell you that now, so that when it happens, you'll remember that you were told beforehand. And in that moment, because you know that, you won't turn away, but you'll turn towards him. The one who is worthy of all your trust, all your hope, all your faith, the one who loves you so much better than you deserve, the one and only true person in your life that is constant every morning, every afternoon, every evening, and every day of your life. I hope you come back next week as we wind it up, as we get to the resurrection. But sometimes it's good to stop before the great news and hear the other aspect of great news. That Jesus knows just exactly who you are. And he loves you because of who you are.